Hello, welcome back everybody to another German Grammar for Beginners lesson. This is lesson number 11, and as I promised you, today we're going to do another exercise and revision session together. So we're going to go over the grammar content of lesson 7 through 10 one more time. I'm going to present you my vocabulary list, and we're also going to solve a couple of exercises together. So let's dive right in. The main point of lesson number 7 was about how to express liking for something or for an activity. So, when we want to express liking for an object, meaning a noun or a pronoun or a person, we are going to use the irregular verb mögen in order to do that. And we need to remember mögen is conjugated irregularly as ich mag, du magst, sie es mag. Wir mögen, ihr mögt, Sie mögen, and we will then take the thing that we like as the direct object of that verb. The standard example sentence that we have been using was I like sushi, with sushi clearly being an object here, a noun. However, in contrast to that, when we want to express liking for an activity, so for a verb like eating sushi, we cannot use mögen for that. Instead, we are going to use the adverb gern, which is placed immediately after the conjugated verb, as in the sentence Ich esse gern sushi, because now it is the activity that we express our preference for. Okay. Lesson number 8 was then about the 3 different forms of address that you can use in German language in order to call someone you. So we have an informal singular form of address, which is just du, which you're going to use with friends, family, acquaintances, anyone on eye level, so to say. We have an informal plural you, which in German is ihr, so you guys. And there is also a formal way to address a person that can be either singular or plural. In both cases, we are going to call the person sie. We are going to do that with strangers, most of the time our colleagues or our bosses, at our companies, at our workplaces, unless the boss explicitly invites you to call him du, which doesn't really happen that often, to my knowledge at least. So it is the context and the formality of the situation which determine the form of address that needs to be used. So far, so easy. Now, it did get a little bit more complicated starting from lesson number 9, where we talked about verbs with prefixes. And those verbs can either be separable if the prefix is detached during conjugation, or inseparable if the prefix remains attached to the verb during conjugation. Whether or not it's detached depends on the prefix. So you can study that on a prefix by prefix basis. If it is one of those verbs where the prefix does get separated, it is then placed at the very end of the sentence. And lastly, lesson number 10 spoke about reflexive verbs and that they indicate the fact that the doer of the action is at the same time also the receiver of the action. So when subject and object of the sentence are congruent, one and the same person. We then need to apply the reflexive pronoun sich, which also needs to be adjusted in accordance with the subject of the sentence. You remember the table we have been talking about. Ich, mich, du, dich, sich, etc. Okay, so we need to modify the reflexive pronoun to be congruent with ich, du, sie, es, etc. And this was the tricky part about it. Reflexive pronouns can either stand in dative or accusative case. Accusative if the pronoun is the only object in the sentence. We move into dative case if there is another direct object in the sentence, which then receives the accusative in our stead. And since the last 2 lessons were definitely the more complicated ones, this is what we're going to focus on today. So the exercises that I prepared are specifically tailored to deepen your knowledge about the contents of lesson 9 and 10, verbs with prefixes and reflexive verbs. But before we get to that, I proudly present my recommended vocabulary list, which took me a really long time to identify because it is honestly not an easy thing to say which verb is more important than another verb. You can go by frequency, but that really doesn't always make sense in any case, because frequency and functionality is really not always the same thing. But I am quite content with this list here. I have ranked them alphabetically. The category verbs with prefixes contains 51 vocabulary items, and I personally believe if you have studied these, the ones that I'm presenting to you here, so 51 of them, you are quite covered for the entirety of levels A1 and A2. Now, of course, you will rarely ever be confronted with speech in a real life situation that only uses vocabulary that you have studied yet, but I believe you will be able to express yourself quite well, or well enough, if you know these vocabulary items from these categories. Of course, we have previously also studied other vocabulary from other categories, which I of course also recommend you to study. And I try to make it easier for you, first of all, by indicating when a verb is separable. So I have kind of inserted this backslash here in between the prefix and the verb. Of course, you do not write it like this. The infinitive is of course spelled without this punctuation here. So abfahren without anything in between is the infinitive. This is merely here to help you understand, this is the end of the prefix and I need to separate it when I conjugate. However, in contrast down here, for example, beginnen, be, is also a prefix, but it does not get separated. So I did not use any backslash here, okay? Also, as I always do, I provide you with there's very often not just one translation for things, but with the one that conveys the meaning best, in my opinion. And I also indicate if a verb is regular or irregular. And even if it is regular, if it ends in one of the consonants that requires some special attention with the conjugation endings, I indicate that with a little star behind it. So you should be able to conjugate the verbs with the information I provide you here. And now it's up to you to squeeze the vocabulary into your mind, into your head. Now, there is one word of caution here. German is a very tricky language to study like piece by piece without any context, because first of all, some of these verbs don't require any object. Some of these verbs require an indirect object only, dative. Some of them require a direct object only, accusative. Some of them require both accusative and dative, and some of them stand with a preposition, with a dative object, etc. There are so many different grammatical categories of verbs, and I of course did not indicate the prepositions here because we haven't spoken about prepositions yet. But please know that after studying this vocabulary, you do not yet know how to actually apply it in a full sentence with a correct object, because that requires us to talk about nouns and cases, which we will do in due time. I promise we're going to get to that very soon. But please know that in order to form complete sentences with many of these verbs, you need to know much more about cases and prepositions and what needs to be done to these verbs grammatically in order to make them able to stand with an object. Okay? Therefore, I do recommend flashcards for you to understand. Like, study the German side of the flashcard and see if you remember the English translation. It is not that much necessary to show yourself the English side and try to come up with the German word, because it is incomplete in the sense that I just explained to you. But I would like you to be able, when you see the verb abfliegen in a sentence, or you will see fliegen in some sort of conjugated form, and yet then you will see up at the end of the sentence, I want you to be able to connect this piece of information, that this thing at the end is a prefix that belongs to the verb, and what the infinitive that you see there actually means. Okay, this is what I would like you to do, or this is what I would recommend you to do. And then there is another list, recommended vocabulary list of reflexive verbs, and of course this is much less than verbs with prefix. I think for levels A1, A2, you should be more or less fine with these 25 items here. As you see, they are defined by having a reflexive pronoun in front of them that you will then need to modify based on the subject of the sentence, which we're going to practice in just a minute. So, as always, for those of you who are new to my channel or who maybe for whom this is the first lesson that you watch, if you would like to have my lesson material and especially these vocabulary lists, you will find my email address in the info box down below. So please just write me a very brief informal email and I will send you all of my material via email for free, okay? Let's move on to the exercises. This is the important part of this lesson. We will start by practicing something more about verbs with prefix first, okay? We want to be saying, the lesson starts at 9 a.m. and the verb in the German sentence to start is anfangen. Anfangen. Now, after you have studied my vocabulary list, you will see that anfangen is a separable verb. So we already do know that an is going to be placed at the end of the sentence. Now we still need to conjugate fangen. If you studied my lesson on irregular verbs, which I hope you did, then you know that fangen belongs to an irregular verb category that changes from a to e in the second and third person singular conjugation. Unterricht, der Unterricht, grammatically speaking, makes lessons a he in German grammar. He, der Unterricht starts. So we need to conjugate for third person singular and we will say, der Unterricht fängt, stem change from a to e, fängt 9 Uhr an. Der Unterricht fängt 9 Uhr an. Now, another way to say that, there is a synonym, another verb in German that carries more or less the same meaning that you can use. Therefore, the translation of the second example sentence is actually identical to the first one. The lesson starts at 9 a.m. But instead of anfangen, we can also use the verb beginnen. Beginnen. So maybe by now you remembered that the prefix be is not separable. It is a prefix, but it stays where it is. So we need to conjugate beginnen for third person singular. This is a regular verb. We will therefore conjugate der Unterricht beginnt, including the prefix that remains at the beginning of the word, 9 Uhr and nothing. We don't have to put anything at the end of the sentence, only if there is a separable prefix. We can either say der Unterricht fängt 9 Uhr an or der Unterricht beginnt 9 Uhr. Quite the same meaning. Let's look at sentence number 3. We want to say, the concert finishes at 10 p.m. Aufhören is the verb that we're looking for here. To finish or to stop doing something. In German, we use the verb aufhören. Auf is a separable prefix. Hören is a regular verb, which you will see in my vocabulary list. We therefore conjugate das Konzert, it, third person singular, hört 22 Uhr auf. I haven't taught you numbers yet, I know. You can passively absorb. The point of the lesson is, again, the verbs, okay? But you can already try to deduct the rules about how to tell the time, okay? We're going to come to that. Das Konzert hört 22 Uhr auf. It finishes at 10. Now also for this verb there is another synonym in German that does not have a prefix. It is just simply enden, to end, to finish, to end, okay? So still, the rest of the sentence is the same. Das Konzert, and now our stem ends in a D. What do we do with verb stems that end in a D during conjugation? Yeah, you know, right? You have to know. Das Konzert endet 22 Uhr. No prefix, nothing to be put at the end of the sentence. Okay, so very often you will find that you have more than one verb that is able to bring across the meaning that you want to be saying, but depending on which one you choose, you need to pay attention if there's any prefix involved, and if so, does it get detached or not. Let's move on. Okay, we want to be saying, you are preparing the breakfast. So we do not have any are-ing form, so we just use simple present, okay? Vorbereiten means to prepare. You already see we have a T as the last consonant in our verb stem, so get mentally ready to adjust an extra E into the conjugation, okay? Vor is a separable prefix. Das Frühstück is the breakfast. We therefore conjugate Du bereitest bereitest das Frühstück vor. Du bereitest das Frühstück vor. We want to be asking, do you understand me? To understand in German is verstehen. Verstehen. Ver is also a prefix, but it belongs to the inseparable category, so it stays where it is during conjugation. Here now we have a yes-no question. So where do we need to place the verb in this case? For yes-no questions and for commands, the verb is going to be placed in the very first functional position of the sentence, right in the beginning. Sie is the polite formal way of addressing someone, so we need to conjugate for third person plural, which is the conjugation form for polite formal you. We will therefore say, Verstehen Sie mich? And nothing to be detached. Verstehen Sie mich? Do you understand me? Our next example sentence also has a verb with the prefix ver. He earns a lot of money. To earn, in German we say verdienen. Verdienen. Ver, no matter what verb it is attached to, never gets separated during conjugation. He, er. We need to conjugate for third person singular. Er verdient sehr viel Geld. Very much money. A lot of money, of course, but the word-by-word translation would be very much money. And nothing detached. Ver stays where the verb is. Er verdient sehr viel Geld. Next sentence. I am listening to the conversation. I listen to the conversation. Our verb to listen, zuhören. Zuhören. Zu is a separable prefix. We can already mentally put it at the end of the sentence. Ich, hören is a regular verb. Ich höre dem Gespräch zu. Ich höre dem Gespräch zu. So here is one of the examples where you have a preposition in the English sentence but not in a German one. You don't say, I am listening the conversation. Then it would be a direct object. In order to have the conversation as the object of an English sentence, you need the preposition to. I listen to the conversation. In this German sentence, we have no such thing. And very often it is exactly the opposite, vice versa, where we will use a preposition and you guys don't. Let's move on to the reflexive verbs now, and let's also pay special attention to the reflexive pronouns. Okay, I have prepared 3 example sentences with gaps for each single vocabulary item. Okay, so we will start with the reflexive verb sich entspannen. Sich entspannen. We have used this verb in our example sentences of the last lesson. Maybe you remember that sich entspannen means to relax, to relax. So we want to say, I relax in the sauna, we relax in the sauna, and he relaxes in the sauna. So not only do we need to adjust the conjugation of the verb, we also need to adjust the reflexive pronoun to ich, wir, and er. Let's do that together. I relax in the sauna. Ich entspanne. Ich belongs to mich. Ich entspanne mich in der Sauna. Sauna is not an object. Sauna is a location. Okay, this is why we do not need to use dative case. Sauna is a description of place, not an object. Ich entspanne mich in der Sauna. Now, we need to conjugate entspannen for first person plural now, wir. Wir entspannen. What belongs to wir? Uns in der Sauna. Still in accusative, but it does look the same as the dative case anyways, in this case. Wir entspannen uns in der Sauna. And now we move back to he. So the verb will be conjugated as entspannt. And what do we do with third person, no matter if it is singular or plural? The reflexive pronoun for third person, singular or plural, is always going to remain sich, as in the infinitive, okay? Entspannt sich in der Sauna. He relaxes himself in the sauna, so to say. Let's now do the same thing with the verb sich verabschieden. Sich verabschieden. So I remember in the last lesson I made a fool out of myself trying to explain how to understand the verb sich verabschieden, and it does kind of depend on if you're the one going, or if someone else is going, whether or not verabschieden is reflexive or not. Let's try one more time, okay? We want to say, he says goodbye to the guests, or they say or you say goodbye to the guests, meaning he or they or you are the ones leaving. Okay. Verabschied is our verb stem. What do we need to do with the conjugation ending? It ends in a D. We need another extra E before we can go to the T. Verabschiedet. With sich. Verabschiedet sich von den Gästen. He goodbyes himself from the guests. Okay. If we now conjugate this for third person plural, sie, plural, we will need to modify the conjugation. Sie verabschieden, and it is still the reflexive pronoun sich, because we're still in third person. We just moved from singular to plural. And last one, you say goodbye to the guests. We now need to conjugate for the du form, which again does something to the conjugation ending after a D. Du verabschiedest dich von den Gästen. Du and dich. Von den Gästen involves also a preposition, which is why we do not count it as an object that takes our accusative case here. Okay, we do not need to use any dative because there is no accusative case object in this sentence. As I explained, you can ignore objects that are initiated with a preposition. But since you don't know yet what a preposition is, anything that looks like one is a good guess. Okay, I will come to prepositions also. We need to cover grammar bit by bit, one by one. Okay. Number 3. Sich fühlen, to feel. We want to be saying that I, you, or we feel a bit ill. Ill in German is krank. I feel myself a bit ill is how we say. So I need to conjugate. Fühlen. Ich fühle, nothing irregular happening here. Ich, mich. Ich fühle mich ein bisschen krank. Du fühlst dich ein bisschen krank. Ich mich, du dich. And wir fühlen, what belongs to wir? Uns ein bisschen krank. Ich fühle mich, du fühlst dich und wir fühlen uns ein bisschen krank. All of them in accusative case. And last but not least, here is where I would like to show you the difference between one single object in the sentence and two objects where we need to apply two different cases. Okay, our best standard example was to comb. Okay, to comb yourself. Sich kämmen. The first sentence only wants to say I comb myself. Myself is the only object in the sentence. It stays in accusative case. We do exactly what we've done until now. Ich kämme mich. I comb myself. Ich kämme mich. In the other sentence, however, it is now die Haare, which take the position of the direct object of our sentence, because now it is specifically the hair that I'm combing. I become the indirect beneficiary of that action, so I'm going to put the reflexive pronoun into dative case now, which we do with indirect objects. The conjugation of the verb itself remains the same, ich kämme, but mich from accusative now becomes mir in dative case, because the accusative has moved from the reflexive pronoun to Haare. Okay, there are circumstances when two objects in a sentence can both be in accusative case, but those are very rare. Okay, usually we will have one dative object and one accusative object. Ich kämme mir die Haare. Now we want to say the same thing about you. You comb yourself. One single object, accusative case. Du kämmst dich. Du kämmst dich. But you comb your hair, follows the same logic as the sentence that we just looked at together. Du kämmst, and dich now becomes, in dative case, dir die Haare. And accusative has gone to the hair. Du kämmst dir die Haare. Now let's conjugate the same thing for we, for us. We comb ourselves, wir kämmen, accusative case, uns, and full stop. Wir kämmen uns, we comb ourselves. And now, this is one of the other important points I would like you to remember. The change from accusative to dative is only visible in the ich and du forms. So in this last sentence here, the reflexive pronoun is still going to be put into dative case, but you can't tell that apart from an accusative case reflexive pronoun. They take the same form, but of course the grammatical function is still dative. So we will say, wir kämmen uns die Haare. It is still uns as it was in the sentence above, but it is now dative case. Wir kämmen uns die Haare. And I hope that this revision made things a bit easier for you to understand. We're going to move forward with how to ask open-ended and closed-ended questions, a little bit about German sentence bracket, and especially negation. I'm looking forward to that lesson very much. I get asked about it all the time. So I would love it if you keep watching. I hope that you enjoyed this lesson as well. If you want my material, please write me to this email address here. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys again in the next lesson. Dankeschön. Tschüss.